Every day's the same.
We have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same.
We have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same.
Everything is exactly the way it was before. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same. I'm sorry.
Hello. Oh, that's weird. Welcome to another episode of It's Time to Rewind, a podcast stuck in its own time loop, right along with the movies we discuss. In this season, we're taking a look at time crimes. Oh, I still can't get over how weird that is. But anyways, I am your host, Bubbawheat from Flights, Tights, and Movie Nights. And in this episode, we are discussing Jess's end scene in Triangle that starts at 80 minutes and 47 seconds, with Jess waking up on the beach surrounded by crabs, and ends at the end of the movie. Once again, my guest is Lackey from the Gallifrey Transmissions. How are you doing today?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm doing really good. It's nice that this was a much quicker season with just... this isn't the end of the season, but it's the end of the first movie this season.
Sure.
And I'm excited again to get back into this podcast, and I'm really curious to see what your reaction is after actually finishing the movie. For anybody that doesn't know, which, anybody listening to one of these kind of podcasts, it's kind of weird to jump in at the end, but you do you. But I had Lackey on for the first episode this season, and he had not watched the whole movie. And this time we were talking about the end, which does have some repetition of the beginning. And he has watched the full movie. So before we get into this chunk, let me ask you, what did you think about the movie as a whole?
It's really weird. I watched it twice. I watched it right after we recorded the first episode, or recorded my first episode, and I didn't like it much. I thought it was a little bit overlong. I felt it was a little bit too repetitious, and I couldn't, there was a thing, and even to the point where I tried to draw a diagram and tried to figure out what I was missing. I couldn't figure out where, for the sake of argument, I'm going to refer to the two Jesses in my discussion here.
Yeah, I typically in this season I usually refer to them as Jess 1 is the one that's fresh off of the boat that doesn't really have any memory. Jess 2 would be, during the second loop, the one that kills Victor, and it is generally just kind of observing for the most part. And then Jess 3 is the one who eventually becomes Baghead Killer Jess.
I have a diagram where I basically only refer to two Jesses. There's and because I am a superficial moron, I refer to them by their clothing. So there's Dress Jess, which is the Jess that we see with the kid in the beginning and in the end. Mm-hmm. And there's Shorts Jess, which is Jess as she actually appears on the boats.
Yeah, and I think I refer to I have referred to the Jess wearing the dress as original Jess.
Okay. And I couldn't figure out where the loop started. I couldn't get over this whole thing in my mind that I couldn't figure out where Dress Jess became Shorts Jess. That Shorts Jess's loop just seemed to be playing over and over and over, and there was no point in which she started it. And
yeah, it's interesting because you did mention the first time that we talked that it seemed like this movie starts in media res, which it definitely does for various reasons, and I can understand because it seems like original Jess wearing the dress, she never seems to escape this loop. It's like she gets killed by the Jess who has already been trapped in the time loop.
Right. It seems that the short Jess, as I call her, seems to be infinitely caught in this loop. There's no point at which one Jess becomes the other Jess. There's no point at which the loop starts, per se. It just goes over and over and over. So in anticipation of this, I watched this again, and I noticed something really key, and that I might not have noticed if you had not said something crucial to me when we recorded my first episode, which is you asked me at one point why I thought at the beginning of the film Jess packed the stained dress into her luggage. Because at the end, I noticed of the film, I noticed something very crucial. Now, to kind of recap where we are in the film, Shorts Jess wakes up on the beach, goes home, notices, and goes to her house and notices that Dress Jess is there. And this is where we get something that's really, really crucial that's withheld from us up until this point. Dress Jess is abusive to her son Tommy.
Yes. They skip over that in the beginning whenever we see the scene at the beginning of the film.
Right. So what?
And I didn't double check, but I think that the abusive comments would have happened like whenever it blacks out for the credits.
Yes. That's when it would happen. So Shorts Jess kills Dress Jess, stuffs her body in the luggage, packs the stained dress that she's wearing, stuffs all that in the trunk, heads out. We have the scene with the gull hitting the windshield. And then we have a very peculiar scene where she's getting rid of the gull. And it's peculiar. I mean, there are two peculiar things that happen here. The first thing is that she throws the gull, the dead gull over the ledge, looks down and sees a pile of dead gulls. Indicating that she's still in a loop. But there was something else that kind of I noticed, which is that during this scene, it takes place near a high school. There's a marching band playing, and there's two interesting things about this marching band. Number one, they're playing Anchors Away, which is the song that's playing on the gramophone on the ship.
Yes, right at the transition between the first and second loops.
And then the second thing is she sees the drummers for the marching band, and she sees the design on their drum heads matches the design on the drum head in the ballroom. On the stage in the ballroom, there's like a jazz band set up.
Yes.
And they have the same design, which indicates that there's some sort of link between what's going on here and what happens on the ship.
Right.
So they get back in the car. She starts driving again. The accident happens. And what I initially thought was that we see a dead body on the road that is Jess. And I thought, okay, the first time I saw this, I thought, okay, the dead body of Dress Jess has been thrown out of the car. And then I noticed something very telling about the body on my second watch. And this was the point at which I messaged you yesterday and said, I think I understand this film now. The body is wearing the stained dress, which we've already seen her pack. So if that was the original dead body that we saw her kill, it shouldn't be wearing that dress. That indicated to me that I was misunderstanding what this film was all along. I like it a lot more now that I'm pretty sure I have a fairly good theory of what is supposed to be happening here, which is that she's in hell.
Yeah.
And this is her living this time loop is her punishment for being abusive. That where this is the point where Jess enters the time loop, the point of her actual death. That's the body that we see is the Jess that died in the car crash. Shorts Jess never kills Dress Jess in actuality. How we reconcile,
or she didn't in the first,
events,
and she didn't in the original timeline.
She didn't. What we're seeing is the original time loop.
Well, this is, this is like loop, I would say like loop 40 or 50 that we're seeing. But
it's the whatever number loop that we're seeing. But in terms of the chronology, but this is what actually happened.
Yeah, I can see that. She didn't. It's not the dead body of Jess that fell out of the trunk and out of the luggage, but
right.
This was the first time around. This Jess was in the driver's seat.
Right. So then that was when I realized what this movie was that the time loop Jess, Short's Jess, is already dead. This is her ghost, her spirit, her soul, whatever you want to call it. At least that's my theory.
Yeah.
And I did a little bit of research, and it looks like that's the going theory about this film, is that that's what happens. So I'm really happy that I seem to be right about this.
Yeah.
That I seem to be getting one. And like I said, my appreciation for what the film does, it grew exponentially. I still think it's a little bit overlong and a little bit over repetitious, but
yeah, I can see that. But I do like I like the concept of having the threes, like having the loop inside the Aeolus happen 3 times with the name triangle, which also echoes the Bermuda Triangle, and having this all happen in 3s. I mean, we don't see the larger loop. We only see that at the beginning and the end. But the smaller loop on the Aeolus, we do see it 3 times. And I think that there's enough differences that as far as the repetition, it does skip a lot of stuff, and the third loop, it's much shorter. I think it's only like 10 minutes, where the first one is 20 minutes.
Right.
And it does get shorter each time, and we do see different elements from different perspectives. I think really the only thing that is kind of a true repetition that we do see 3 times is like the confrontation with Jess 1 and Baghead Jess. We see that 3 times, and then the first and the third one, we see it almost exactly shot for shot. And then we also hear the conversation with Jess and Greg in the hallway, where she's talking about her son as her world. We hear that conversation 3 times.
Right, my world is waiting for me at school.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think we also see, for some reason, the thing that sticks out to me is we see Downey with Sally, and Downey's eating a banana. We see that like 3 different times too. But let's jump back to the beginning and kind of dive into this section. It's not quite right to say it's a loop in itself. I guess it kind of is, because this is like the section of the larger loop, because this is like a time loop within a time loop movie, because we do have like the smaller time loop that repeats 3 times within the Aeolus, and then we have the larger time loop that happens outside of that with her and her son and boarding the triangle in the first place. Which does make things confusing, but I feel like I did pretty much understand it the first time I watched it, and I do like how it's structured.
It's a very interesting film in the way that it's structured. Mm-hmm. That you're, I don't really know how to phrase it, but there is something very clever, I think, about how it's structured. In that, and again, we discussed puzzle movies the last time we recorded, mm-hmm. About how this film kind of encourages you to it's structured so that it's constantly encouraging you to kind of interrogate what you're seeing and how it fits in with what you've already seen. and try to figure it out from there.
Yeah, and I do think that this portion of the loop, it does start out immediately giving a clue that it's not quite right, because I think in a standard time loop movie, whenever we would get to this point, we would think that, maybe she has escaped. But the fact that the shot that we see of, the close-up on her eye being open as she's lying on the beach, and the crabs, and the coveralls in the waves being washed ashore, that is the exact same scene that she saw in her dream whenever she fell asleep on the triangle.
Right.
And the only difference is, during her dream, as soon as the waves hit her foot on the beach, that's when she woke up on the triangle. And here, it just keeps going on. And then we get to see what happens after this. And that's already a clue that this is something that's happened before.
Right. With a lot of puzzle movies, you run a particular risk, or any real suspense movie for that matter. You have a real risk of suspense comes from not having all of the information.
Mm-hmm.
You run a risk of the audience figuring out what's going on too far ahead of where the characters are.
Yeah, and I think it does leave little clues, because we do see like the coveralls and the waves, but it comes by so fast that you don't really understand what it is whenever you first see it. And then watching it again, this time you understand that was what she was wearing whenever she had the bag over her head. And we get a slightly better look at it as well in a slightly later shot.
And it's obviously, with me, it did a very good job of keeping. You want to encourage the audience to play along, but you don't want them to figure it out too far ahead of the characters, because you just get impatient if the characters are just so stupid that they can't figure out what you've already figured out.
Yeah. And I think that this movie overall does a good job of leading Jess to believe that she has to kill everybody on board in order to make the time loop reset, in order to give herself another chance to do it right the next time. Right.
And it does do a very good job of that. And like, considering I never figured it out on my first watch, obviously it did a good job of that. You want, but that's, I think I appreciated its structure more upon rewatch. I said in the first recording that I felt that this was going to be a movie that was going to reward rewatching.
Mm-hmm.
And it really does, because you notice things. I noticed a lot of things that I didn't notice the first time. And some of them may have been innocuous, but and not really tied into each other. For some reason, I have a note here about Miami. The life preservers, and now I think it's just a background detail. The life preservers have the word Miami printed on them very prominently, and there's various points when we sort of ominously kind of start to zoom in on a life preserver that says Aeolus Miami. And it kept sticking out to me, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I thought to myself, well, Miami's towards the southern tip of Florida, whereas we clearly see earlier that she drives out of Florida.
Yeah.
So where that kind of gives the ship a sort of weird otherworldly quality, that it's out of Miami, but wherever they are, they're nowhere near Miami.
Yeah, and I don't believe, like, my Florida geography is horrible. I know you can, I think, drive out to a certain point, like on the Florida Keys, but I don't know if, like, in the Florida Keys, if you can drive to a point where there are anything like past, like if you can leave the U.S. going out to the Keys, like if there's any of those islands that are connected by roads. that are no longer the U.S. or that are no longer Florida.
You can't get to another place in Florida by going through the Keys. The Keys, and the other thing is that the Keys would have been considering this film was made, I believe, in either Australia or New Zealand by an English director with a largely New Zealand Australian cast.
Yeah, it was filmed off the coast of Queensland.
Okay. First of all, the road that goes through Florida and goes through the Keys ends at Key West. I know this I've been to Key West, so I know that for experience. You can't get past west of Key West on a road. It doesn't, that's just where it ends. The only way you can get out of, and Key West would have looked very distinctive. If the setting had been Key West, it would have looked a lot different than it should have looked a lot different than what we see. What we see is not like representative, I don't think. Again, considering that this film was made in Australia, it would have looked. It's not like you can just basically show anything that's tropical and pass it off as Florida. The other thing is that to drive out of Florida, you basically have to be on the Panhandle.
Yeah. You'd have to be driving to be on the coast and in Florida. Well, I guess there would be two different spots where you could be on the coast and leave Florida, either like the north, like on the northeast coast, or if you go the other direction on the southern, southwestern, north, southwestern U.S., but the northwestern tip of Florida, going into Georgia, I believe.
Yeah, it goes into Georgia on the northeast. I think it goes to Alabama on the northwest. I have family in Florida, so I know these things.
I know I know I see a lot of Florida license plates, so I know Florida's not too far away from Georgia.
Yeah. But it just, I don't know if that's a deliberate thing on Christopher Smith's part or just an incidental background detail that doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
Incidental background details that do mean something. You had mentioned that you had pointed out to me that there is a Shining reference in that the house number is 237.
Yeah.
I noticed that this is also the cabin number on the Aeolus where they find the message written in blood, meet in theater, is also cabin 237.
Yeah.
And I have a note here. The Shining takes place in a luxury hotel. Triangle takes place on a luxury liner. And there is a fan theory that there's kind of a time loop going on in The Shining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that.
In the film, because of what we see at the end, the close-up on the 4th of July photo. So,
yeah, there's definitely a lot of parallels. I don't think we see that too much in this end scene, but we do, like, going back to the timeline in this clip. After she wakes up, she kind of wanders around in this forested area until she finds a road and hitchhikes back, I guess, near her house, because we don't actually see her get picked up. We see her put her thumb out to hitchhike, and then we see her running to get to her house. So we don't. There is that kind of time jump because we don't really know how far this is. I know in the beginning there was kind of a little bit of like a passage of time where it seemed like it was a longer drive, because we do have like the establishing shot of her driving, and it's like, the wide shot, so we see the car a ways away with her, like you mentioned, leaving Florida. But this time it just kind of skips over that, and then we get back to the scene with Jack again mowing his lawn with the electric lawnmower, which I won't get into again. and the sprinkler.
And the sailboat in the wading pool, which takes on a new kind of sinister significance.
But like Jess gets to her house and like she's looking in the window. I do think it's interesting that it, even though it does have the cut, I get the impression that she went straight to her house, even though
Right.
she told the lie that her son was in school. And let me ask you, do you think that Jess has a memory of being in the previous time loops, or do you think that the memory is erased, like as she repeats the different time loops? Like one theory is that her memory kind of gets erased, like whenever she goes to sleep in the triangle. So whenever she wakes up, she has like kind of a vague memory of it, but not any specific details. So everything's kind of fresh for her every time she starts the time loop over.
It's I think of it not so much as being erased. There's definitely a fading of memory. Something she says, and I think she says this after she wakes up, and I don't know if, again, it's just a piece of foreshadowing or if it's actually supposed to speak towards her memories. But I believe that there's a scene, and I believe it's after she wakes up. There's a scene where she and Greg, I believe it's the point where Greg is trying to encourage her to take the wheel, and he asks her how she's doing, and she says every day is the same.
Mm-hmm.
And what I don't know is that if that's an indication that her memories are I think there's a little bit of an inkling there. I think her memories definitely get hazy because she doesn't go into it. She doesn't at this point. If she was going into it, she should, with full memory of everything that happened before, she should know and be able to kind of head a lot of this stuff off before it even happens.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly there's some sort of haziness there or some sort of clouding of the memory. But the line about every day is the same makes me wonder if that's what's happening. It's not that the memory is erased so much as it's just kind of cloudy.
Yeah, I kind of fall somewhere in the middle too, because I think that there is at least some memory of what's happened before, but the theory that I like is that she knows that her son is dead, and she knows that she's in a time loop to a certain extent, and she feels like she has to do everything the exact same way because that mirrors her life, bringing up a child with autism, because she mentions that he has the same routines and he doesn't like it if things change, and so she is deliberately trying to do the time loop as close to the same way as possible every time, so that way she knows that she will make it back to her son where her son is alive again.
Right, but she's not full-fledged. She's not full-fledged entirely into it, because another thing that I noted that I wrote down is that when we first go through the loop, when they're on the ruins of the sailboat, when they're on the ruins of the triangle, and the Aeolus comes up and everybody's going over to the ship, she's hesitant.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as if she knows that that she's getting kind of like her first inkling. It's not just the deja vu that she gets later, but there's that first kind of inkling that she knows something is wrong about that ship. And that's kind of like a cloudy memory. To me, that's kind of like a cloudy memory coming to the fore.
Yeah. Where she knows something is off, but she doesn't have enough of a memory, or it could also be tied into her eternal punishment that she's not able to make the choice to not have them go onto the Aeolus, because if she's able to make that choice then that would be a way to potentially get out of the loop and avoid it altogether. But it's a combination of, she doesn't have the full memory, but she also wants to recreate things in order to see her son again, and she's also being eternally punished like Sisyphus.
Right. And another note that I have, since you brought up Sisyphus, is that Sisyphus is specifically punished with his punishment is for making a promise he didn't keep.
Right.
Which is the same with Jess. Jess similarly makes promises throughout this film that she does not keep.
Yeah.
Even to the extent of, she even says, I think to one point, I think she says to Baghead, Jess, I can save our son. She kind of promises to do that, and she's not able to.
Mm-hmm.
And even one of the last things she does in the film to the taxi driver, she says that she promises. He says he'll leave the meter running, and he asks her, "You will be back?" And she says, "I will be back, I promise."
Yeah.
So that was another thing that it took me the second viewing to pick up on.
Mm-hmm. But jumping him back again, I'm at the point where, Jess is seeing original Jess or dress Jess as she's like picking up the clothes and seeing the boat in the pool and, being abusive. And I think it's interesting that, that the time loop Jess or shorts Jess, she has this distressed look, but I feel like it's like, she's sad seeing this happen, but I feel like it's a sadness that's tinged with her memory that was her
Right.
Because, she, during this whole loop, she's presenting this image that she's a good mom and that, she just wants to get back to her son so she can continue being a good mom. And then she's being brought face to face with the fact that, no, she wasn't a good mom. At least,
right.
She wasn't 100% a good mom. I mean, everybody who has kids, they do have moments like this. And we don't know from this if this was just like a temporary slip up or if she was in fact an abusive mother.
My suspicion is that she was. You have to kind of compress things down for a film. The sort of nuances that you have in real life. And not that I am defending child abuse in any way, shape, or form. Real people are complex and you just, anybody who's a parent. I'm not a parent, but I know this from my own. Everybody's, even people who aren't parents have had parents, have lived with people who have had parental roles in their lives. I would say that's a nigh universal experience, at least from the receiving end, understands that, being a parent, the parent-child relationship is a very complex thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, not every parent is going to be at their 100% level best 100% of the time. And you're going to slip up. You're going to yell at your kid. You're going to say things you shouldn't. You're going to behave in a way you shouldn't. And again, I'm not trying to say that, child abuse is inevitable or to justify it. But a film by necessity has to kind of collapse that into something that you can understand in an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Or an hour and 40 minutes or what have you. And you don't have certainly you don't have the time to go into an entire examination of Jess's relationship with Tommy, but you do get the broad strokes of something that you can kind of extrapolate from. She definitely has resentment. I mean, even if her slapping Tommy is a one-off thing that never happened before, there's clearly simmering resentment on her part when she says that, when she compares him to his father,
Yeah.
there's so much resentment in that line. That line about "you're just like your father" does a lot of work. And you get the feeling, I got the feeling that, it may have been the slap may have been a one-off, but the abuse was a pattern.
Yeah, I can agree with that for sure. And then Shorts Jess we see her, ring the doorbell, just like what happened in the beginning of the movie, and that we get that explanation, and then she goes off with a purpose. Like, this is a Jess on a mission as she goes to the shed and gets the hammer. Like, she knows what she's going to do whenever she ambushes original Jess and just straight up murders her.
Exactly. And there's no, I don't feel that she would have, I don't feel that that Shorts Jess would have had that visceral reaction to her what she saw. Again, not that child abuse can be justified, but if that was, I tend to feel that if it was a one-off incident, if she knew it was a one-off incident, she might have done something else. She might have, but this was something where she decided right then and there that Jess, her former self, had to die.
Yeah, and I do think it's interesting that the scene where Jess murders Jess, it's a very visceral scene. Like it is violent. It's not extremely bloody, but it's very visceral. And I also think it's interesting that once again it's shown with a mirror in frame where original Jess is sitting looking at this mirror in her bedroom, and again we have this this shot of basically three Jesses, because we see original Jess, her reflection, and we also see original Jess in person looking in her reflection, and then Shorts Jess we only see in reflection. So we see only three Jesses in this shot. Until original Jess goes out of frame, and then Shorts Jess comes into frame. So we never see four images of Jess in the same shot. We only see either two or three. And then she and now Shorts Jess has taken over the role, and she tries to comfort Tommy, and this is again the scene from the beginning, but of course it takes on an entirely different tone, because that he's not freaking out because he spilled the water and he's upset thinking that he did something wrong. He's freaking out because he just saw his mom kill his mom.
Right. So in that way, Tommy's autism, while a thematic, while something that matches thematically, is a bit of a red herring. You're supposed to initially think that this is that he's having, I don't know what the term is, that he's having an episode,
a tantrum.
like a tantrum. I don't want to say tantrum is not really the word I want to fixate on. I don't know a whole lot about autism. But
he's he's having a breakdown or like a
he's having a
attack.
breakdown, and he's having a panic attack. That's a good way of putting it. And because he's autistic, and obviously it turns out he just saw something extremely reality breaking for him. It's not even necessarily that he saw something incredibly traumatic. You're not supposed to see your mother murdered, but you're definitely not supposed to see your mother murdered by her duplicate.
Yeah.
It's almost at this point like it sort of turns into this was a point at which it almost turned to me into like a doppelganger thriller, which is its own kind of genre and has its own stuff. But that's, yeah.
And I didn't notice this before, but I'm just looking at it now. We see Shorts Jess stuff dress Jess into the luggage bag.
Right.
Which is, basically turns it into a body bag, and as she is about to zip it up the rest of the way, she pauses to steal the locket because, Shorts Jess lost her locket in the Aeolus. And so she steals the locket off of original Jess. And so this is how the locket keeps coming back over and over again. And I noticed that the painting behind her, it's an interesting, it's not quite MC Escher. It almost reminds me of Alice in Wonderland. We see it's like it kind of reminds me of an Alice in Wonderland chessboard, kind of like MC Escher-ish.
A bit of an optical illusion.
Yeah. But I think that's kind of an interesting choice that they use for that background detail. I'm not sure exactly what it is. And then, of course, as she finishes zipping it up, we see that shot where, it looks like it's just the dress as she zips it up. But then we see her struggle to fit it into the trunk. And in terms of, movie logic, I think it's probably not a, 130-pound woman in there, but something much lighter because she doesn't struggle with it that much. But she does kind of struggle to put it in the trunk.
Right. But I think the important thing there is that we do see that, we see it put in the bag, we see it put in the luggage so that we can make the point that it really shouldn't be outside the luggage when we see the body next.
Yeah. And then now we have this conversation with the new Jess and Tommy in the car, and she goes on about how that woman wasn't mommy, and that mommy is not nice until she hits the bird.
Uh-huh.
And at this point, Tommy is very withdrawn. He's kind of calmed down, but he's very withdrawn.
Right.
And it's not until after she hits the bird that Tommy starts freaking out.
Uh-huh.
And like we mentioned earlier, this is when, she gets out of the car to get the bird and toss it off the side of the road. I'm kind of curious what made her at this point decide that she needed to get rid of the bird, other than the whole the movie reason, because this shows the audience the pile of dead birds to again clearly show the audience that she is still in the middle of a time loop and she hasn't actually escaped the time loop, which the clues kind of lead you to believe that.
It's I was thinking of that myself. I don't think it's entirely outside the realm of how humans might behave in that sort of situation. I have a friend who buries roadkill. If she sees a dead cat, particularly a dead cat or dog on the side of the road, she'll pick it up and go and she'll keep it and bury it until she can bury it. Obviously the main reason for Jess doing that is so that we can see the pile of dead gulls.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting that there's kind of it's kind of like a circle of life in a way, because jumping back, whenever we saw the deck full of the dead Sallys was being surrounded by a bunch of seagulls, and then this we're seeing a pile of seagulls and they're surrounded by a bunch of crabs. Right.
The two animals that you see quite a bit in this, the crabs and the seagulls, they're omnipresent in this film. As basically, I don't know what the symbolism. I don't know if they have a standard cultural symbolism.
Well, I did read that that the bird, even though it's I think it's very clearly a seagull, but I think it does it is supposed to be a bit of a reference to like the Rime of the Ancient Mariner and the killing the albatross, which doomed the mariner. And there's a few parallels to that because in the Ancient Mariner, he also is doomed to, like, he doesn't kill the other crewmates, but he is forced to see all his other crewmates die. In the ship. And Jess, she has to see all her crewmates die, and then eventually she ends up being the one that's killing them.
Right, and I thought of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner as well. And I also thought of, obviously this film came much later, but The Lighthouse. Gulls are an important thing and an ominous sort of harbinger of things in the film The Lighthouse. So they have to have some sort of symbolism, I figure.
Mm. And I do like the way that this accident is set up, to where Tommy's in the backseat throwing a fit, and then Jess is looking back behind him and not looking at the road. And that's something that happens a lot in movies where people are having a conversation and not looking at the road. But in this case, she drifts over the center line and straight into the dump truck, or this large truck, and has a very movie-esque car crash.
Yeah, it's very cinematic, which is appropriate since it's a movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I also got kind of like a bit of a hint there that I think that's her old personality. I think that might be a little bit of, she doesn't really like yell or scream or be abusive towards him, but you see kind of like a shortness of temper there, which I think is maybe dress Jess coming out. The part of her personality that's the abusive mother. Yeah,
and even though I think, because this does happen out in the public, I think that you could stretch it and say that potentially the Jesses switched places at this point, other than the fact that it would be difficult for them to change their clothes,
right?
To where maybe you could potentially stretch out a theory that the Jess inside the trunk wasn't dead. She was just knocked out, and then during the car crash, the driver Jess was the one that died, and that's how they switch places, and that's how things go. But I don't know, that's a potential theory. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I did think it was worth mentioning. But the other thing that I did notice is whenever we do get the shot of dress Jess, lying on the road, she does have this streak of blood, which I think it's not an exact mirror, but it's very similar to in the second loop, whenever Baghead Jess was shot in the head, and then she took the bag off, and she had the blood running down her face in a similar way.
Right.
Which I think is another interesting repetition without being repetitive, like a nice callback. And I know you already pointed out the logo on the drum being the same as the one on the Aeolus.
Yeah.
And I talked about that logo a bit more in that that episode in the second loop, which I don't remember. I don't remember all of that, so I'm not going to get into the symbolism between the A and the O. But if anybody's curious, they can listen back to that episode. And then we get the sky visibly darkening whenever the camera pans around to show Schwartz Jess and the driver coming up, which I think you mentioned it already, but I think it is pretty clear that the intention is that this driver represents death.
Yeah, more so I'm thinking Charon, the mythological ferryman.
Yeah.
Is what I'm necessarily thinking here. But yeah, this is definitely some sort of transitory figure that's basically come to take her to the afterlife or to take her to the next step.
Yeah,
you know,
and I
whatever the
definitely
next.
think that there is some sort of supernatural element to him, because whenever he walks up, he immediately says, "No point in trying to save the boy. There's nothing that's going to bring him back."
Right.
And, as we can see it, there doesn't appear to be any visible injuries, at least not visually as we see in the movie.
Right.
So I think from a normal person, they wouldn't necessarily come to that conclusion just by looking at a motionless body.
Right. And the way he specifically says nothing will bring him back. It's not so much there's nothing that can be done. It's more there's nothing you can do.
Right.
That's the implication to me. He's specifically he's not saying not so much saying he's going to die. It's more that he's telling Jess there's nothing you can do to prevent him from dying.
Yeah, and I do think that line especially clues the audience in that, and that strongly implies that he's not only aware of the time loop, but he's also potentially actively perpetrating it himself, or he's actively involved in perpetrating this time loop.
Right. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that he's actually perpetrating the time loop. He's definitely giving her the option to opt out of it. Particularly by saying, by saying he'll leave the meter running and asking her if she's going to return. He's giving her agency in it, So I think it's something I have a feeling that it's something he's sensitive towards, but it's something a little bit out of his control. This is I get my reading of this is that Jess is trapped in a hell of her own making. Or at least if it's not everything is of her making, she has the choice to, as I say, opt out of this and continues to condemn herself and will continue to condemn herself.
Yeah, and we do see her fall asleep during the cab ride. And I do like the theory that she does at least lose some of the memory of the time loop when she sleeps. So I think that whenever she wakes up, she has this choice, but she's not able to, she's not thinking clearly because she has slept, and so she has, the memory of what's happened before has gotten fuzzier.
Right. It also kind of struck me when we saw her asleep in the taxi. I don't think that the ride could have been that long for her to have naturally fallen asleep. She says to him, "Take me to the harbor," not a specific harbor, but the harbor. So either there's only one harbor in this locale that's near this locale. Or she believes she knows that she knows that he knows where to take what harbor she's talking about. I think the second is a little bit more likely, but either way, I think it's definitely not a natural. I don't know. She could be. I mean, you could say it's a natural thing, and she's in shock from what just happened to her. But I think it's a little bit of a kind of there's something preternatural about this sleep. It just, I mean, amongst other things, it just doesn't seem like it would be that long a ride.
Yeah, and then this is the first time, she gets back on the dock and we actually see the conversation between Jess and Victor, where she has this long, awkward pause before coming up with the line that her son is in school. And then it goes on to an almost exact recreation of the first scene on the dock. And the only difference that I noticed, because I did kind of cut back and forth between two of them, is whenever Greg asks if she's sure that she wants to go, we get this kind of ominous slow zoom into her face before she says yes.
And I think the pause is longer.
Well, in the original, instead of the close up to her face with the pause, it cuts to the others on the boat for a moment, and then it cuts back to her. So I think the pause is about the same length, but it doesn't seem as long because we're getting visually
because we're getting different. We're getting other information. Okay, good point.
And then also in the first scene, she actually repeats yes a second time, and in this time she only says a single yes.
Right.
And then we get the pan up to the bird flying away, and that's all exactly the same as it was in the first scene.
Right.
And then we cut to credits, which I'm not gonna. I've talked about the cast enough throughout this throughout the previous episodes, and I'm not sure if there's anything really interesting to dig into in terms of the other cast. I mean, I will say that I'm somebody that does generally watch the entirety of credits, at least whenever I go to the theater. Not so much whenever I'm watching it at home, unless I know there's something at the end.
Same here, and also being someone who does stuff on superhero movies, you're probably almost at this point programmed to wait till the end, because it's the MCU movies that have started to program us to expect stuff after credit sequences and in the middle of credit sequences.
Yeah, but that brings us to the end of Triangle. And I think this has been an interesting journey for me, and I'm glad that I convinced you to watch it, and even though you weren't completely sold in on it the first time, I did say that it rewards repeat viewings, and it sounds like it did that for you as well.
Yeah, it did. I really enjoyed it a lot more. Once I had a clearer understanding of what it was moving towards and what the themes were, and once I could analyze it a little bit more, I began to kind of realize what it was doing and where it was going, and then I enjoyed the experience of it a lot more. So I did in fact really enjoy the movie. I didn't hate it the first time, mind you. It just I just kind of had, and it could have just been I wasn't having a good day. I had some issues with it, and I kind of got hung up on a couple of things. And once I was able to clear that up, I felt got a good idea of what it was I was looking at and how to enjoy it.
Yeah, and I've really enjoyed digging into this movie and these 6 individual episodes, and really digging into each scene with kind of a fine-tooth comb. I think there might have been some background details that I could have gone into a little bit more, but I think I covered this as well as I wanted to, and I think it's a great movie. It's constructed very well. The acting is really good, especially Melissa George, who really carries this movie on her shoulders.
Oh yeah, and Melissa George. If you're listening, I apologize for constantly confusing you with Melissa Leo.
Yeah, I did that in one other episode because I was thinking that she was in Red State until I think maybe you made that comment in our Facebook group chat, and then I realized that I was thinking of that was Melissa Leo that's in Red State and not Melissa George.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, she's good in 30 Days a Night, which was Melissa George.
Right.
Which is another film that I'm familiar with of hers. But I think this pretty much wraps up this section of this season. For anybody listening at home, this season is not done yet. I am going to be continuing on with the next movie, which has, spoiler, it has a similar format. It's not. This next one is not a horror movie or thriller like this one, but it does have a similar structure to the time loop, where there are multiple versions of the character that appears in each iteration of the time loop, which I like that theory in a way of a time. It's almost like predetermination. Things happen because they've already happened. And I think that's an interesting concept to explore this season, and I think this movie does a good job, even though it does just show us like one section kind of in the middle, and it does seem like this is something that is ongoing, like we've said, like a Sisyphus eternal damnation punishment time loop, similar to the Judgment Night Twilight Zone episode. And I do think that's definitely one way to look at this film specifically, and it rewards multiple viewings. Like I've said, I don't think there's any much more I can say without repeating myself, like I'm Jess going through the Aeolus again. But is there anything else that you'd like to say about this movie before we finish up here?
I'd just like to mention one other thing. One of my last notes here is we've mentioned Stephen King several times, and it occurred to me that there's actually a Stephen King story with a very similar, with kind of a similar premise, the idea that hell being having to relive the same moment or series of moments over and over and over. It's in his collection, Everything's Eventual, and I believe the name of the story is That Feeling You Can Only Say What It Is in French. The feeling being, of course, déjà vu.
Yeah.
And I have to wonder if Christopher Smith was familiar with the story, because that story, if I recall correctly, does take place in Florida.
Oh, that's interesting.
So
yeah, I did put feelers out to Christopher Smith's agent, but I haven't heard anything back, and honestly didn't expect to, but you never know.
Yeah. All right.
But thanks again for joining me on both of these episodes this season. And for anybody else, why don't you go ahead and take another moment to let them know where else they can find you online.
Where can people find me online? I have to look this up because I don't run my own site anymore. I can be found at Rabbit Hole Podcasts. I don't have a direct URL to my Gallifrey Transmissions column, but it can be found at rabbitholepodcast.com, along with a large number of other fine podcasts, some of which also involve me as a guest. Or in the case of From Inner Time, a Doctor Who podcast for about 6 episodes that included me as co-host. But yeah, I am a member of the Rabbit Hole family, and I can be found at rabbitholepodcast.com.
All right. And as always, I am Bubbawheat, and you can find me on Twitter where I'm at Bubbawheat. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. You can join that to discuss episodes as they come out, get notified about future seasons, and also have discussions about time loop movies and TV shows in general. And then, the next episode we will be talking about time loop. And then until then, I know I did this to you once before, Lackey, but
Kill them. You have to kill them.
You have to kill them.
You have to kill them.
You have to kill them all.
I'm sorry, Lackey.
Every day's the same.
You have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same.
You have to kill them. Kill them. Kill them.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same.
Everything is exactly the way it was before.
I'm sorry. Every day's the same.